Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Sumbula and I'm with Peaceful Families Project. Welcome to Swipe Left or Swipe Right, the digital search for an in real life partner with Dr. Amina Mahmood. A little bit about Peaceful Families Project before we start. We're a national nonprofit and we focus on education and training for leaders, community members, and service providers in the areas of domestic violence awareness, healthy relationships, and cultural competency. We are also a resource for resource development, research, and technical assistance. Please, Dr. Amina Mahmood.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining us on your Sunday afternoon. I know that there are many webinars and online programming right now to choose from since we've been in the pandemic. I hope all of you are doing well. Before we get started, I just wanted all of us to just take a moment and arrive to the present, whether that be perhaps by just finding the position in which you'd be comfortable for the next maybe 45 minutes to an hour, whether it's seated comfortably, whether it's laying down, whatever works for you. I know we'll be more interactive towards the end after the formal presentation. So please also feel free to send in questions along the way. So for me, perhaps grounding myself and centering as I get started is going to look like maybe rolling my shoulders up, back, and down, finding a dignified posture for my spine, connecting with my breath, so taking a few deep breaths in, and maybe taking a moment to say a dua and set my intention. So for you, it may be different than what it is for me. For me, it's probably going to be the dua for speaking, the Prophet Musa's dua, right? To open my heart or my chest to make speaking easy so that the message I have to convey comes across to you. You may have entered today with different intentions. So take a minute, ground yourselves, breathe, set your intention for today, for your reasons for attending this presentation, and we'll get started. So now with our set intentions, Assalamu alaikum again. This slide is just outlining the format of the presentation. So just giving us an idea of what the structure is for today, what you may expect. So I'll start off with a personal introduction. We'll follow that up by thinking about our expectations, our boundaries, exploring those a little when it comes to the world of online dating and finding a match for our real life partner. We will look at some online dating apps and websites. So we won't exactly be going to them. I have some listed that are popular right now, but we'll talk about some of the logistics of how to navigate that environment and that landscape. As all of you know, and those of you who are active on it know, changes just day to day. We'll also cover some self-care aspects, and at the end, we'll just open it up for Q&A. So my introduction, and I like to do this because I want us to be aware that all of us go into the world with our unique lens, with our biases, our prejudices, certain way that we view the world. And especially if we're talking about going into a search for a partnership, we're bringing all of that with us. So before we move forward into finding someone else who could be a match, we need to just be really aware of who we are and what we're bringing in. And as part of me doing this presentation, I believe it's really important for those of you watching to know who I am, as that guides some of the things I will say. And we all know that our Muslim community is very diverse, diverse in terms of ethnic and cultural backgrounds, language, diverse in terms of practice. So I just want you to be aware of where I'm coming from, because that may or may not match your lens and your perspective. So taking ownership of who we are and what we bring is really important, as that goes into all the relationships that we are in. I'm South Asian, Pakistani, grew up around the world in various different countries and different developmental stages of my life because my parents were either studying or teaching, and we got to travel with them. So definitely a unique background. Family, especially immediate family, very important. Part of that we could think about through the context of what's an important religious and or cultural value, honestly. So both intersect. Professionally, I'm a counseling psychologist. I have my doctorate in counseling psychology from the University of Iowa. So I spent quite a bit of time in the Midwest during that time. So some of the Midwestern cultural values probably come across as well. And by virtue of being a psychologist, some of the ways in which I view the world is definitely impacted by my professional background. And all of that comes together into making me the person that I am. And that's really important for all of you to consider as you consider your journeys. And I'm aware some of you might be people who are already active in the online dating world. Others may be thinking about it, just curious. Others may be on here to help their friends, family members figure out different options, and just others out of the sake of curiosity. So just know what your intention is, which is why I'd ask you to set it at the beginning of the program today. So let's explore our expectations, right? Think about personally, what are you looking to get out of this today? Be aware of some of the questions that pop up and arise through the presentation and webinar, and send them into our facilitator as well so we can respond to those towards the end. Think about if you are somebody considering marriage, which from the Muslim perspective, many of us tend to go towards as we open up the door to online dating or in-person getting to know people, right? Whatever language we're comfortable using. What are your reasons for doing this now? What do you want? Who are you? I mean, that's an important question too. What are your values? Why now? Is this a good time? What is important to you, right? Strengthening the self, I feel, is really important because many times there are cultural or familiar pressures that tend to push somebody, and it could be ourselves, it could be someone we know, into the world of, hey, you need to go find somebody for yourself. And the first and foremost important thing to do before you do that and fall into that pressure is to ask yourself if you're ready, because that's ultimately who matters the most. When you're ready to take this step, that's when you're going to do your due diligence and really move forward in a way that's authentic to you and in a healthy manner, versus pressures coming at you, making you perhaps act in ways you do not wish to act or do certain things you're just not ready for. And I know that our families in certain ethnic and cultural groups have a long way to go in learning when to ease off of that pressure that some of us experience. So be aware of the cultural pressures, the familiar pressures, be aware of what do you really want. So some of the pictures here on the side, we're seeing pictures of couples and families, right? This webinar is being conducted in a North American context. In the North American Muslim context, what we do know is that interracial relationships are and have been on the rise within the Muslim community. And that is just to be expected. We're a minority community. And for those of us who would like to stay married within the faith, we don't really have probably the quantity of people from within our own cultural group to choose from. So many of us tend to look towards religious values and beliefs that match and go for that. That being said, though, we also want to acknowledge that there are biases and prejudices that we take in or our families have contributed to as we've grown up that may impact how open we are to exploring the idea of marriage with someone who may be of a different ethnic, cultural, linguistic background than we are. And for that, I would say, really explore your wants, your needs, what your limits are. What are you okay with? What are deal breakers for you? Our families, not do not always know what might be a good decision. And especially this, I'm directing more to people who may have parents who are of immigrant backgrounds, and they are working through a lot of their own issues that usually arise from cultural beliefs and expectations rather than religious. So really have that discernment of religion and culture, and also the intersectionality of religion and culture for yourself. But really the most important question is, what do you really want? Create a support network for sure. So those of you who may have other friends who are single, it's great to communicate with each other as you set off on this search. Many of you will probably be on the same portals or overlap in terms of different apps, websites, and other things you try as you try to get out there and meet people that may be a good match for you. So definitely having somebody who can be in your support group, so to speak, is really great and very helpful for you too. So really key piece to start off with, do a thorough survey of yourself and your needs. Don't judge yourself, be compassionate, be kind moving forward. Managing our expectations too, right? Sometimes we create a list of unrealistic expectations for ourselves, and especially when it comes to relationships. So that's where, as I ended the last slide, I said, be realistic, be compassionate, be kind, be non-judgmental. Think about, as you get into more specifics of expectations, what are your boundaries? What is your timeline? That's practical. Are there certain expectations you have of your partner or their families? And as you're starting to get into the search, will they be able to manage those? Will those expectations be met? Are they realistic? And sometimes this may be, taking a few weeks, a month out as you're in your search and doing a reassessment. For many people that I've come across within my clinical work as well as in my personal life, depending on the ethnic or cultural background of the Muslim family, many times people have not had much experience in opposite sex relationships, engaging with somebody on even like a friendly manner of the opposite sex, just depending on how they were raised. And so there's a lot of questions about what's healthy, what's not. Many times we go into these situations just having perhaps our parents and other close family members' relationships as guides. And if those relationships are not healthy, then that is really something that we need to consider. So definitely consider and think about what are some of your boundaries that you would like to set in terms of time frame, right? Just allocating time for this. So when we go towards, a job hunt or our next educational degree that we would like to get, or think about for those of you who are college age, applying to college or in college, the amount of time and energy and effort you put in researching the right colleges, researching workplaces, do the same here. So think about the amount of time and effort you need to put in here to do the work. So to manage those expectations. How are you going to go about this search? And we'll get into this a little bit more moving forward a few slides from now. But how much time is reasonable and realistic for you to spend? Is our family members going to be involved in the process? How are you going to limit the search? So you have to also take care of your own health and well-being in the process. You are the most important person here, right? You are also going into this with something to give the other person. So you don't want to be constantly 24/7 on websites, on apps, fielding phone calls from other like matchmaking sources, going to meetup groups, things like that. Think about what's healthy for you. So limit the search. We know through psychological research, when we are given just an overwhelming array of choices, right? It's harder to make a decision. Same applies here. So limit searches to a couple of websites or apps or a few different portals and go from there. And also allocate that time for yourself. What is your timeline? That's really important as well. Some people go into this process with an expectation that, inshallah, within 6 months, they'll have found that person that's a good match. They'll be done. They'll be talking about wedding preparations. Other people go in somewhat more skeptical, more cynical. It's important to set your timeline. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm going in with a purpose. I've set my intention, my niyyah is clear. I've prayed istikhara, and I'm hoping, inshallah, maybe a year from now, this will wrap up and there'll be an outcome that's beneficial for me, right? So really think about that timeline, but be flexible there too. We can only do what we can to guide ourselves and to manage our expectations, our strategies, our time here. We don't know what the other person is doing or saying in terms of their intentions and what their timelines are. So just be aware of what your timeline is and set those expectations for yourself. Let's move forward. Very important here. Think about what a healthy relationship means to you. And let me read you a verse from Surah Rum. You've probably heard this before, and for others, it might be a nice reminder to reflect on. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And among his signs is this, that he created for you mates from among yourselves, that you may dwell in tranquility with them. And he has put love and mercy between your hearts. Verily, in that there are signs for those who reflect. Surah 30, verse 21. So think about that. Allow that to sink in. Yes, there's all sorts of relationship blogs to follow, right? There's all sorts of advice that's being offered from different portals. But think about this, right there in the Quran, right? A book that most of us hold very dear and look to for guidance. We have a clear guideline on the boundaries of a healthy relationship, on what to expect from something healthy, right? Respect and understanding, kindness, compassion, trust, non-judgmentalness, all of that, that's right there in the Quran for us. This slide, perhaps right now it may not apply to you. You can perhaps think about your own family that you grew up in. Think about these elements of a healthy relationship that you saw present within your family. Think about what you would want in the family unit that you are seeking to establish also. So this is available on peacefulfamilies.org. Click the resources tab, it's under our publications. So you can definitely go there and download this for yourself and study this. So this lists some of the elements that I explained or stated on the previous slide. That is that for a relationship to be healthy, there needs to be that safety, right? There needs to be a sense of calm and peace and trust, compassion and kindness, a mutual love and respect and understanding towards one another. So consider these elements as you move forward with your search. Very important to be aware of what we are deserving of. So on the flip side, we have red flags. So flagging unhealthy relationships. In this process, absolutely, right? It's hard when you are in the online dating world. You don't know who's on the other end. You have to already start the process with a level of trust present. Some of the things in terms of red flags that pop up for people are people do not share consistent information. And this could be something as simple as misrepresenting oneself in your pictures if you are on a platform where you are sharing visual images of yourself. So making yourself essentially look like something or someone you're not through your pictures. That's deception. You want to take pictures, of course, that show you in a good light, but you don't want to mislead someone on in terms of who you are. There's other inconsistencies in terms of when you might be chatting with somebody, getting to know them, that will arise. You know, you'll pick up on these. I think stay tuned to your intuition, to your gut. Be aware of the signs and signals that you are receiving, okay? Because many times what happens is that this little twinge of discomfort that we may experience when speaking with someone, whether in real life or even on these platforms, it occurs because we've picked up on something. So be aware of that. There may be inconsistencies in information shared. Some things that you may catch them in saying one thing when at another instant they said something else. You may not be experiencing a level of trust there to keep that conversation or interaction going. They may be making you feel less than. within the online context, some of the things to be aware of are ghosting. And I know to some extent culturally, ghosting has, generationally rather, perhaps, or culturally, I'm not sure, ghosting has become somewhat acceptable, I would say. So when you're done with somebody, you just sort of disappear, right? So you may have been chatting with somebody for a few days, maybe you also had a phone call or two, but then you just disappear. You're done with them, you're not interested. Um, and that, I think, is a red flag, because that's also some of what we're doing online. It's also showing us what that person might be like in real life. So being aware of that as well. Don't ghost, don't engage in ghosting, and don't put up with that. If you are a mature adult, which you should be in this process as you're starting off, you should be mature enough to let someone know that you are no longer interested, rather than leading them on. And another important thing with this is that we all bring in, like I said in the beginning, our own stuff with us, right? I haven't really gotten into the mental health aspect of it, but we could do some serious damage to someone else's self-esteem, their mental health, by treating them unkindly. And I think one area in terms of online searches, dating, relationships that I would consider for all of us is treat people as you would in real life, right? And the way you're treating them on an online platform sometimes will, to them, indicate how you might be treating other people in real life as well. So that works both ways. Other things in the online setting to be aware of, sometimes you might be speaking with someone, having what you think is a pretty good interaction with them, and they may pop back in and say something that doesn't match at all what your conversation was about. Sometimes what people tend to do and are guilty of in these platforms are they tend to overextend themselves. So you may be talking to like 15, 20 people at one time, and you're not going to be able to keep all of the stories straight and where the conversations were. So be aware of that. Don't do that yourself. And if you get a sense of someone else doing that, you may want to question how much further you want to take that conversation. Honesty is really key. So being honest with them is really great. The other piece to be aware of, for the healthy piece as well as the unhealthy, there needs to be an element of a give or take, even before you've met each other or FaceTimed. So if you are messaging, there should be messages being initiated by both parties, right? It shouldn't be one person always initiating. And I know now some of our cultural elements come into play sometimes, where, yes, I will say it, that sometimes females think that they are the one that always need to wait for the male to initiate conversation or communication. Depends. I mean, it's on your comfort level, but think about it from both angles, right? But whoever's on these sites, you've made yourself vulnerable. And you don't want to play with someone else's vulnerability. If they're opening themselves up to you to get to know you for a specific purpose, they deserve the same from you. So definitely respect that, acknowledge that. There should be a two-way level of give and take. If that's not happening, if you're the one always giving, you're the one always taking, step back, rethink the process, okay? So here we have more details on elements in an unhealthy relationship to be aware of. So some of the red flags I mentioned, they may not meet this criteria necessarily, but they are an indicator of where potentially the relationship could go if you continue to go on with it. So if there's already an unhealthy pattern being set up when you're getting to know somebody, you really want to reassess and think about what you want to do next, right? Yes, absolutely. Give the person a benefit of the doubt, especially if there's some level of attachment there or shared vision and value. Many people may be pursuing a relationship for their first time and may not know the how-tos. And we know through research that within the Muslim communities, many times we go in with unrealistic, maybe Hollywood or Bollywood expectations of how a relationship unfolds. And those are not healthy expectations. So being aware of that for ourselves, okay? Some red flags that may pop up as you are moving forward with communicating with somebody may eventually potentially turn into some of the items listed on this power and control wheel. So especially if you are starting to get to know somebody, through these online platforms. And every time you walk away, or many times that you walked away from a conversation with them, they don't make you feel good about yourself. They belittle you. They talk down to you. You really want to pause and take a step back and reconsider. Okay. Again, this Power and Control wheel is available on peacefulfamilies.org resources tab in our publications. So definitely you can download that. It's available, and take a look again at this. The next thing to be aware of are being a good digital citizen, right? So all these portals, websites, apps, they're online. Yes, you may log in with a password, but that doesn't mean it's private. Yes, you may have extensive privacy settings set up on any portal that you're on. Forget the relationship apps, even think about Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, all of those platforms. You can have your privacy settings set up to the utmost high level. Anytime you type something in, post something, whether it's an audio, video recording, or text, consider that it's not private at all, okay? Just be aware of that. Whatever you put out there into cyberspace stays there. So be aware of your own privacy. You know, what is important to you? Sometimes my rule is anything I put out online, even if it's on email, I am okay saying it in person to that person that I'm communicating with, and or I'm okay with other people reading it or hearing it or seeing it, especially my parents. And sometimes that's a guide for me to let me know where that boundary or that limit lies for me. So being aware of that. Be responsible and respectful in how you communicate, and follow your Islamic values. That's really important. So know how to keep yourself safe, especially when it comes to when you are either FaceTiming or communicating via phone with somebody, or are on the next step of meeting someone in person. Make sure there are responsible people in your support network who know the basics, who know how to contact you and where to contact you, just for safety purposes. Now, this is important, right? Which app or website to use. And I'm sure some of you might be disappointed that I'm not going to directly tell you where to go, right? So I'm not a PR person for any of these websites or apps listed here, but I'm basically pulling together some of the more popular ones. And as you can see, there are ones geared toward the Muslim population specifically, and there are ones just geared towards everybody in general. They don't have a faith-based a component to them. They may have a faith-based component, but that's not their primary value or mission. And I've put both options out here for us just because, number one, recognizing, right, we are a minority community, which means it's harder to find each other if the basis for finding each other is we would like someone who is Muslim and they're the kind of Muslim that we are, or they balance us really well, right? So finding those people is going to be hard to do. I can't firsthand speak for all of the websites because some of them are new to me as well. But some of them that I have done more research on, I can discuss those a little bit. And there's a little mixture here too. So we know the bottom three, Coffee Meets Bagel, Bumble, and eHarmony. Those are designed just for the general population, right? So they're not specific Muslim focused apps or websites. However, Muslims have had good success on it. And it all comes back to what your purpose is, right? So define what your purpose is. That's going to guide where you go. Knowing who you are and what you're wanting, knowing your values, that will help guide you. You know yourself best. One thing I would say is limit yourself to maybe 2 or 3 apps or website options at a time. Remember, extra choices does not mean that you will find your person sooner. It's just going to overwhelm and confuse you. That's just how our brains are designed. So with eHarmony, for instance, that's long-standing. Many of you may have seen ads for that a lot on TV. They have quite an extensive questionnaire, I think, that was developed by psychologists that people fill out. And then they have an algorithm through which they match people. The cool thing here is that they are really taking a look at your values, right? What is important to you? What are your deal breakers? A similar site that is Muslim focused that does a pretty good job with that is halfhardeen.com. They have quite an extensive questionnaire that people take with them as well. So think about where you stand here. I mean, both these eHarmony and Hafardine are going to require a little bit of legwork from you. Are you okay with that? Are you ready for that step yet? You know, so use that as your guide in terms of what you're willing to do next. Both Hafardine and eHarmony, I believe, are paid platforms. They may have a trial run where you can use them for free, but they are paid. So think about the pros and cons of what that may mean. One thing sometimes with paid platforms, the people that tend to go towards paid subscriptions have a different level of seriousness. Sometimes, not all the time. So I'm not generalizing here, but sometimes they are more serious about their search. So it weeds out just naturally people who just want to go on these sites just to play around, right? Because we do have a lot of people, and those of you who've been on these sites know this firsthand, that aren't there with the best of intentions. So sometimes paid subscription sites tend to weed some of those people out. So that's a benefit. You may not have the money to go into a paid subscription site, and that's okay, because people have had success on sites where they have not had paid memberships. So be aware of that as well. Mismatch, I've been hearing a lot of buzz about lately. The last few years, I've had clients who've tried it successfully. I've had friends who've tried it successfully as well. They have a built-in FaceTime option within the app, so that's pretty nice. You don't have to share your phone number with anybody if you're not comfortable. They also have an option for having a chaperone present. I'm not quite sure how that works, but it might be either similar to, I think, how Hafardine was doing it at one point, and I know they've upgraded some of their strategies too, or some of how they work. But that's good for those of you who would like to, even in the virtual world, you know, for your values and your comfort level is to have that chaperone present. So be aware of that. I also want to highlight at I Meet Soul. I believe that's an Instagram page handle. You can also take a look, do a quick search for an article that was published about this on muslimgirl.com. So this, I have not watched this other show. I believe Netflix had a show that was very popular this spring into summer, Love is Blind. So the idea really, or the concept was getting to really know somebody, getting to know their personality, who they are, without the externals that sometimes get in the way for us. So really getting to know the person and being attracted to the person versus what they bring externally. Because we know we're not all going to look like we're a teenager in our 20s our whole life. So I Meet Soul was started with a similar concept of getting to know somebody without actually having a visual, and then seeing where that goes. So you can find some more information on their Instagram page. I think they were taking their second round of applications. One interesting piece that the muslimgirl.com article states is, and I think it's important to remember in our current context of the comorbid COVID-19 and racism pandemics in the US, it did bring to light the anti-Blackness that exists in the Muslim community. So be aware of that too. And that, I think initially we had that slide with the couples, and I talked about how interracial couples are on the rise within the Muslim communities. Just remember that you yourself may have been raised within the Islamic framework by your families where you are open to the person that you're with being from any ethnicity or cultural background as long as your values match. That may not be the case for family members. So being aware of that pressure too. But I really applaud what these people are doing with the I Meet Soul hashtag, or at I Meet Soul. What they're trying to do here, they're almost taking us back to what Islam talks about, like really getting to know the person, where a lot of us pay attention to the externals. So as you're also moving forward with the app, decision making or websites, look at the reviews, look at the success stories. If you have a support network who's been through this, or they know of other people who have talked to them, it's always helpful to have friends who are on similar portals or have tried different portals. One thing within the Muslim community that tends to happen is that the same person might be on 2 or 3 different portals, and you and your friends may have interactions with the same person or may know them. So sometimes there's that built-in check on a person to just validate who they are, who they say they are. But then it's also helpful in weeding out some people who may not be super healthy in terms of their readiness to be in a relationship. Coffee Meets Bagel is one site, and I'm not sure if some of the Muslim ones up here listed do this, but Coffee Meets Bagel is one site where you do sign up through allowing them a link to your Facebook profile. So you have the option of, if you live in a large enough metropolitan area with an adequate number of Muslims around you, or within that mileage radius that you're looking, you might be able to be matched up with friends of friends, so that they're trying to simulate the real life meeting of finding people through people you know, right? Which happens for some of us, doesn't happen for the rest of us. So thinking about those options and how important those are for you. Half Our Dean also does in-person meetups. So if finding somebody in person is important, you can use a hybrid format as well. So be open to those as well. But consult with your friends, know yourself, bottom line, and limit yourself to maybe a couple of websites or app at a time, okay? Keeping that in mind, find your balance. So as you're in this process, do not lose sight of you, okay? You are the treasure here. You are out there to give something too. So it's not all about finding that other person who's going to complete you. I think that's a very Hollywood concept that we need to get away from. You need to be complete first yourself before you start that search for someone else. During this process, though, it is exhausting emotionally, mentally. There is a lot that goes on during this time frame, right? You're putting in a lot of time and energy getting to know multiple people, which can be draining. You're in the process finding people who aren't helpful. You know, they're draining your energy, they're taking away, but then you're also finding people who you're interested in getting to know more from and more about. Allow yourself breaks if you need breaks in this process. It's not uncommon, it's not unusual for people to be pretty active on these platforms for a few months and then recognize that they're, you know, just experiencing that fatigue and that exhaustion, and then they need to step away from it, okay? So remember, this is a process for you. It's not going to happen overnight. Remember, the success stories that you hear about, they don't just log into one website, find each other at first match, okay? That's a rarity. I know for many people, sometimes that's where they start to lose kind of the faith in that process. They start to really feel down and feel negatively about themselves. So just be aware that this is a process. People aren't, in general, just think about Instagram pictures. People are not going to take pictures of them throwing tantrums or their family members throwing tantrums and their house being a mess. They're going to take those pictures and share them when everything looks picture perfect and everyone's having a good time. Same with some of the success stories you hear. You're going to hear about the successes. You're not going to hear about the 10 other matches that did not work out. So remember, it's a process. Be kind to yourself, practice patience. Please limit the time you spend on the apps, okay? It's easy to get overwhelmed, especially with some of the apps like Minder as well, where you're constantly swiping, you know, and you have like this almost inexhaustible supply of people to swipe through. That's where one of the other apps that I had listed on the last slide, Coffee Meets Bagel, one thing I like about them is that they limit how many people you can swipe through on one day in one go. And so that way you're naturally cutting that limit. And what you're also doing in that process is you're not stuck in that mindset of, well, the next one might be better, the next one might be better, which makes us fall into the trap of never really looking at somebody who's right there, who may be matching us in a lot of our values, our vision, and our dreams, okay? So limit time you spend on your apps. And going back to also like red flags and healthy relationship pieces, as you're going through this process, think about if someone is constantly always on their apps. How does that feel to you? So if you're messaging somebody and they're always responding, always, or excessively messaging you, what message does that send out, right? If somebody's constantly available, a red flag goes off in my head because I'm wondering what else is happening or not happening in their life. Why are they so easily accessible? Is this something that could go down a path that's probably not too helpful or healthy for a relationship? So consider those elements as well. But definitely self-care is tremendous in this process, regardless of the outcome. So one thing to be aware of, and yes, that's not something we would all like to think about, is when to let go, right? So I did speak to this a little bit in the previous slide. This is an exhausting process. It just taxes us emotionally. Our mental health does take a hit. We tend to get easily lost in this process, right? And before we know it, if someone's not hitting like on us back, or they're not smiling or winking or responding to our messages, we're taking it as a personal attack on ourselves, our self-worth, and our self-esteem. If you notice this is happening, that might be a sign that you need a break. You need to step away. You maybe need to let go. Check in with your feelings as well. Are you exhausted? Are you fatigued? Are you irritable? Are you acting like someone you're not with your friends and your family? Those are important signs and signals to be aware of. Are you just getting into a frame of mind where you're feeling hopeless? So remember, some of these signs could signal depression as well. And that's not uncommon to experience during this process. But just be aware of that as it happens so you can take time for yourself, get the support you need, whether that be through family, friends, counseling, therapy, prayer, spirituality, wherever you go to reground, recenter, regain some of your strength. You know, get the reminder of who you are, do that. Listen to your allies and your advocates, your support system. Help them help you. Other side of this. So after maybe just all the trials that you experienced during this process, you find that there's somebody you've matched up with that you want to get to know better, that you perhaps would like to introduce to your friends and your family in any specific order that's comfortable for you. So taking it offline. This is going to be interesting during the pandemic, and we were just talking just briefly about it as we were setting up for the webinar. I don't have real-time data to share in terms of what the impact has been on online dating and relationships during COVID-19. Inshallah, we should have some more information through our researchers soon to see what's happening. We do know that there are people who are still moving on with their lives, right? Just because we're in a pandemic doesn't mean we hit the pause button on anything. That's not how life works. So we do have people who are still having weddings. They're still getting married, virtual formats. Zoom weddings are popular as well. So people are still doing things to keep their lives moving. Same with online dating. In some ways, it's great, right? It works because you don't have to see somebody in person, especially during this time frame when we can't. So taking it offline, that can mean different things right now. That may just mean that you are engaging more in FaceTiming with each other. And perhaps through FaceTime, you are meeting each other's friends or setting up like a Zoom group session so you can get a sense of somebody. It's really important once you've identified somebody that you have a match for. Don't take it 100 miles an hour and determine a date and a wedding and plan it out and get it done. Do take some time to get to know that person offline, meaning off of that portal in their real life, because sometimes what you might be experiencing while you're both on the online dating portal might be a little different when it comes to reality, right? Be able to connect with each other, give each other time to connect in each other's real worlds, right? Remember that in any new relationship in the beginning, there is a honeymoon period. So we're always going to be wanting to really impress the other person or giving them more time than otherwise our work days or work weeks would allow. So giving ourselves time to really connect with each other in our real world would be helpful. Many times we're in that little online platform dating bubble. We need to burst that out and see how we connect in real life. So take time to do that. The timeline again is going to be different for each and every one of us. So be aware of that. Be kind to yourself with that. Keep connecting to what your intention is and how you're doing with it. Now, I do have premarital counseling as a step. Absolutely, I'm a big fan of that. I say that's really important for us to do. Some of you may want to utilize your religious communities and centers that offer that service. Others may want to take a look at, professionals in the community. They could be Muslim professionals, non-Muslim professionals who have an expertise in premarital counseling. And I would say even take it back a step further from premarital counseling. If you know that you and the partner you've matched with will not be getting married for a while, there's no harm in engaging in some couples work. to just really getting to understand each other, how you communicate, improving your communications with each other, your expectations, all of that. You can certainly do that. Think about how to set up when the time comes to introduce them to your family, to your friends. And we can get a really good sense of people through meeting their family and their friends. And we get a really good sense of observing them as they're interacting with their family and their friends as well. So just being aware of all of those elements, and know that even with whether it's a match, whether you're taking a pause and finding balance, whether you have to let go, just keep front and center your intention, your duas, engage in istikhara to help guide you to do the best that is for you. Some resources to share. So Before You Tie the Knot is a really great comprehensive book for people who are married and also people who aren't. So definitely invest in this guide. It's really easy to read, very engaging, offers some really great advice and perspectives, ties in just many elements that we need to be aware of. It has a list of 100 questions to also ask your potential partner, or even as you're searching for a potential partner, to help you just, discern what's important to you, what's not important to you, and where your line is in terms of what works, what doesn't. Same with, I think the third one down the list has a 150 questions for Muslims before getting married. Islamic marriage contracts, I think it's, as you're getting ready to take that step, it's very important to be aware of your rights. So that is available for you on the Peaceful Families website as well. The Family and Youth Institute is listed as a resource too. They have a marriage preparation toolkit. So definitely go take a look at that as well. And just a reminder for us before we break into discussion or Q&A. So just remember, not to lose sight of who you are. It's very easy to get lost in this process and lose sense of self in terms of what we are worth and the value that we bring in. So I'm not saying be arrogant and think you are the best thing ever, but don't let this search define who you are. You already are a complete person with many strengths and talents, and that's what you're bringing to the table. And you're looking for somebody who recognizes that and who is going to value that. Okay, so that was the planned portion of the program, and inshallah, I think we will take some questions whenever we're ready to. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amina, for your presentation. I found it very helpful because I've had friends who have been on the apps and they experience that fatigue and that mental exhaustion. But then I've had friends who went on Half Our Deen, and the first match, like you said, is a rarity, but it ended up working. So one question that came in is, how does one check for compatibility?
Good question. I think it depends, right? So certain sites that you will look into more in detail, they may have certain checks built in place with some of the questionnaires that they ask you to do. That's hard. I think sometimes that's not a survey or an inventory that's going to tell you how compatible you are with each other. It's part of it is working with each other's energy, speaking to each other, spending time with each other in whatever format is available to you right now. So absolutely, yes, in terms of compatibility, there's certain things that you need to check for you. What are you okay with? What are your deal breakers, right? It may be something that you might be ashamed to say out loud potentially. So if I put it out there, like maybe you might say, well, if I'm looking for someone who's a good match for me, I'm only looking 3 to 5 years either way in age, and they have to be of a certain socioeconomic status and this and that, right? So those are certain factors that come into play. You may find somebody that meets all those criteria, but the two of you don't get along. So how do we assess for that? That's really a challenge, right? And that's going to happen when you two have honest and clear conversations around your values, your belief systems. And that's where a few of the resources in terms of the Before You Tie the Knot book and the 150 questions to ask before getting married, I feel like those are really good clarifying questions for ourselves. Even if we're not asking that to anybody else, they help us determine where we lie, where our boundaries and guidelines are. And you certainly don't want to take someone through 150 questions during a first meeting, but you can start to probe and poke at some of the areas that are important to you. And I feel that's sometimes it's a process that takes time. So allow for that.
Thank you. Another question is, what's a good way to build trust with someone you meet online?
Very good question. Again, time is a big factor. I think being able to assess whether they are being truly honest or not, and that comes with the more you communicate with them. You do have to start off with a certain level of trust in an online setting for sure, because otherwise you're not going to be open or honest, right? But like I said, you know, we are in the digital age, and whatever you share, you need to make I feel like sharing less is more sometimes. So protect yourself first. You know, yes, you both are putting each other, you're both vulnerable and getting to know each other. But have your boundaries on what you're going to share with somebody. So definitely sharing things about ourselves first would be important, right? Without, you know, breaking the confidences of other family or friends. I think for me, sometimes what's helpful when I'm speaking to somebody, whether it's online, whether it's people that I've met in person in the past too, is just getting a sense of, and this is just like interpersonal relationships, not necessarily romantic, just getting a sense of how they talk about themselves, how they ask about us, like the interest they show, and how they talk about others if they do so. So if you're with somebody who's constantly bringing in information about other people into the conversation and breaking their confidences and trust, that's guiding you on how they can be trusted as well. And same for you, if you're doing the same thing, that's saying something about how much that other person can trust you. I think there's like an internal, invisible, like this intuitive gut feeling that we have that many times we lose sight of, because our main goal is we really have to find somebody, right? So we have tunnel vision about we have to find somebody, we cannot be unsuccessful again, for instance, and we ignore certain red flags. But you want to make sure that the person's being honest. If you are, I'm a big fan of being able to see somebody in person sooner rather than later, because I think in the online setting, unfortunately, we can go in with the right intention, but we don't know if the other person's coming in with the right intention. So I think it's helpful to have the opportunity to see somebody in person. Right now, it might be through FaceTime. And if we're able to see them like FaceTime with perhaps another friend or family member, that helps give them some credibility too. So being able to do that for me, I think, is an element that brings in trust. The way they communicate about things happening in their life helps to build trust too. But just being aware for yourself, don't just start disclosing any and everything about yourself. Give yourself time and take those steps.
Thank you, that was helpful. Somebody is asking, do you think compatibility is based more on identity traits such as race, ethnicity, class, socioeconomic status, etc.?
I think it's more about our values and what we hold dear, and that could be different. We do know in terms of like social class, for instance, right? Social class cultures can be very divisive. So we may share the same ethnic or racial background and come from different socioeconomic status or social class cultures. And what we know is that we may have a better match with the person from a similar social class culture than the person that might be from a similar racial or ethnic background, because there's certain things that are valued in terms of activities, ways of life, what things we give importance to within a social class culture. So I think it's variable. It's more about how we view the world. I don't think being of the same racial and ethnic background necessarily means you're 100% compatible. It's not as simple as that. I think it's more the values that you have. So that's where I was alluding to the fact that within the Muslim community, especially in North America, there is such a diversity, right? So yes, absolutely. If for you, your ethnic identity is really important, right? And one of the prime values for you is to pass that ethnic identity on, then you would probably be limiting your search to someone with a similar ethnic identity. Same with, I've had some friends who've said, well, language, passing on language is really key to us. And we're going to limit our search to people who speak this secondary language that we grew up speaking. So that's naturally going to cut that down too. So that's really going to be depending on you and your preferences as well. It doesn't guarantee compatibility, but it breaks it back down to what are the values that are more important to you? What are you looking for? What are your deal breakers?
Thank you, Dr. Amina. Unless there's any more questions, I think this was a very informative webinar and I hope everybody gained something from it. Just give it. Does anybody else have any questions?
And thank you for having me for this. And I know we didn't go in depth as we could. I mean, literally the slide with the apps and the dating portals, that could be a full presentation all on itself. So that might be something to consider. If any of the viewers are interested in that, that could be something that could go a whole different direction. But inshallah, I hope there was something useful and that we gained from here today, and we'd really be happy to answer any questions, even if it's after the webinar. And I'm not sure what the process is for that.
So one question actually just came in if you want to continue.
Sure.
Somebody's asking, how do we make sure that our families do not become too heavily involved, so much so that it becomes toxic?
Really good question, and a very real concern. People that I've known personally and professionally, they've chosen to go about a different way. So you're the person who knows your family. Ideally, I think for all of us, we want to be honest and straightforward about what we're doing. And if we have that family support, that's fantastic. I know that there's also some stigma around using these platforms. So some families, some parents, elders may not be comfortable with this or not have that understanding of these platforms and how they operate. It's just too new for them. So assessing your family members yourself, like the level of support that they're able to provide, that's important. Also recognizing that your family members need to learn to let go as well. They need to take that step back. So we have even within the Muslim communities, like one of the questions that often comes up is if parenting adult children, right? For many of you who are in the process of the search, you are the adult children. And I often try to remind parents of the saying of Hazrat Ali, rest in peace, of how, like there's the childhood and parenting is divided into like those increments of 7 years. So the first 7 years, you give the child just unconditional love. The second 7, you're disciplining them. The third 7 and beyond, essentially you're being a guide and a consultant. And I think many parents forget to transition into that guide and consultant. Depending on your level of faith, the community you're in, different ways to approach this. Sometimes if your family has a really good relationship with the imam or a religious scholar or an elder in the community, who that person also has a good idea of healthy relationships, parental boundaries and all of that, you may be comfortable bringing them in to help guide your family or your parents, to teach them to step away from it. If some of the things on the wheels, like the power and control wheels that was presented for unhealthy relationships, like I said, I think I said it for the healthy one, to take a look at what you're already exposed to in your families. If you're seeing elements of in the unhealthy wheel present in your family dynamic too, be aware of that and think about places to get help. So whether that's within your religious community, if you have people trained, providers trained, do that. Whether there's certain friends, counselors, psychologists, therapists, they can certainly help guide you on how to go about it. It's hard to give a blanket response without knowing the specifics of what happens. If you are comfortable enough with your family to say, hey, I'm an adult, and you're able to like pull out, ahadith or certain Quranic verses that help support your cause, and your family does listen to them. Some families do, some don't. You can give that as evidence in a good, reasonable, respectful way to help them understand to step away. If that's not happening, then bring in other people.
I personally think that's great advice. So thank you again, Dr. Amina, and everybody who participated. If you have any additional questions, you can email them to us. This webinar will also be on our Facebook page because we went live. You can add your comments there, and we will be posting this to the YouTube channel.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, everybody.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you, everybody, again.